They want you to fail. We just have to make it to air.
Am I still in the show? Jesus Christ. Sorry, tripped over my penis.
Saturday Night is the newest comedy film to hit theaters. It's directed by Jason Reitman, and this is a film about the very chaotic 90 minutes that led up to the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. And it's crazy for me to think about how Saturday Night Live almost never happened, because this has been something that has been a staple since before I was born. This goes all the way back to the 70s. I was born in 1990, so for my entire life, Saturday Night or Saturday Night Live is a show that's always been on during my life. And so the concept that, oh yeah, this almost didn't happen kind of blows my mind. So I heard there was a film about Saturday Night Live getting off the ground, and I got excited for that. The movie stars Gabriel LaBelle as Lorne Michaels. Lorne Michaels, of course, is the creator of all things Saturday Night. And what this movie does specifically is it says, yes, he is the creator, he is the head of it, but it's a collaborative effort from all of those comedians back then to really get this thing off the ground. And this movie has so many people playing different stars from the past that I can't list them all here, but a couple of standouts. You had Corey Michael Smith playing Chevy Chase, did a fantastic impersonation of him, and you had J.K. Simmons show up in this movie as Milton Berle and give a crazy performance for him. And this movie also starred Willem Dafoe as an NBC producer that wasn't necessarily looking for Saturday Night to actually go live that night. He was sort of using it as leverage against Johnny Carson, and I thought that was a very interesting story in and of itself. So with that said, let me give you a quick synopsis for this film, although I've kind of already done that. But yes, you have this film that's set around the chaos that was leading up to the very first episode of Saturday Night Live. And during this chaos, you have Lorne Michaels going around meeting with producers thinking, hey, we're good to go. You've got people trying to throw in advertisements into his movie. You've got the cast of Saturday Night Live going crazy. So many people doing drugs, so many people just not caring, having the attitude like, if this goes live, it goes live, cool, we're on TV. Otherwise, I'm a comedian, I'll just go do my comedian thing. I don't need this. So many of them had that attitude. So many of them had stuck up attitudes. And so watching Lorne Michaels sort of get everybody to gravitate together towards the same goal towards the end of this film was a lot of fun. It's also incredibly chaotic, which is something we'll talk about here in a minute, where this movie never stops moving. From the opening scene, you are pulled into this world and it never stops. There's so many one-shot scenes in this film where you're just going around the set watching all the chaos happens, and it just draws you in. And so that's the best synopsis that I can give you for Saturday Night. If that sounds like an interesting film to you, well, you should check this movie out in theaters. It is playing right now. Let's get into some of my positives and some of my negatives. My first positive for this film has to be the portrayal of certain comedians from the past that they put in this film. I thought so many of them were done so very well. The impersonation of Chevy Chase, Milton Berle, Belushi, they were done so damn well. They looked so much like them. They casted perfectly for so many roles in this film, and so you really get to dive into that world, because if there's somebody that doesn't really look or sound like you would expect them to look or sound, then it's going to take you out of the movie. For comparison, I thought the movie Iron Claw last year was done so well, except for the Ric Flair impersonation that they had going on in that film. They brought in a guy to act and sound and look like Ric Flair, and none of it worked for me. He didn't look or act or sound anything like the Ric Flair that I would remember, and so it just didn't sync with me in that moment. It pulled me out of the movie, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm watching a bunch of actors on the screen. But in this film, I never really got that. I felt like everybody they cast for this film was cast perfectly. They all looked like very younger versions of the people that I would eventually one day love as comedians, and so I thought they did a great job with that. My next positive has to be the pace of this film. I touched on it a little bit earlier, but it is chaos and it is non-stop. The only thing I can compare it to would be like Uncut Gems. If you've seen that movie, it is a non-stop pace from the very beginning to the very end. Now, there is no death in this film like there is in Uncut Gems, and I feel like Uncut Gems sort of has the edge on this movie for pace because there is that violent measure in that film. There is no violence in this movie. It's just actors sort of being prima donnas, but it is a fun world to be thrown into and just go on this wild hour-and-a-half ride with, and I thought they did the pace of this movie really well. And my final positive for this film is that I loved seeing the behind the scenes look at Saturday Night Live. They've had so many guests over the years. This episode focuses on one night in particular, and there was so much content there, and I can't help but think there's so much more content out there that you could put a film together for based on the different guests they've had, the back and forth with comedians that they've had. Comedians can be a wild bunch, and so getting to watch the behind the scenes was such a fun aspect of this film that I would be down to watch 2 or 3 more of these movies where they just do behind the scenes look at what went on behind Saturday Night Live. Like maybe down the road we'll get like a docu-series about it. That would be really cool too. I would be completely ready for that. But I thought there were instances in this movie that really worked for me behind the scenes, and so it has to be a positive. That'll lead me over to my negatives. My first negative is that while this movie is billed as a comedy, there's not a ton of comedy in it. Yes, there's a few moments where you do laugh, but I wasn't laughing out loud. This was a movie about a show that pushed the limits of comedy for the past 50 years, and the movie never really pushes the limits itself. It seems to play all of the jokes safe. Yeah, there's people that talk to each other and they're rude to each other, and you kind of chuckle at those moments, but in a movie about a show that's going to revolutionize comedy and TV at the same time, you never really get that revolutionized comedy in this movie. And so yes, you will laugh a few times during this film, but not nearly as much as I expected from a movie about Saturday Night Live. My next negative for this movie is that there's a character in this film played by Willem Dafoe named David Tebbutt. Now, I assume this is a real person, but in this movie, David has the full control of the show, whether or not it goes live or it doesn't go live. And some of the dramatic beats from him just didn't work for me, only because I can only imagine that this movie took that character of David Tebbutt and said, okay, there's a big group of NBC executives that were involved in greenlighting the show, but we're going to condense it down to one person so you give the audience someone to root against. And that's what it felt like. And it was almost like it was too forced. And so you had these moments where he was in the background sort of smiling and watching like, oh, I'm going to get these guys. No way they go live. And it's just like, I don't know if that was actually what happened, if that was actually one guy on set from NBC that was deciding whether or not to go live. And at the end of the day, NBC had to approve certain things that were happening in this film because they still own the rights to Saturday Night Live. And I can only imagine that they wanted to paint themselves ultimately as the good guy. So this shouldn't be a spoiler because the show's been out for 50 years. But right at the last second, David reaches out and goes, go live. And you're like, okay, but did that really happen, or was that dramatization for the film? Because if it was dramatization, it really felt like it. It really felt like you were trying to give the audience this yes moment, but it's not a yes moment because we know it's been live for 50 years. So to me, they sort of over-dramatized the use of David Tebbutt in this film. And my final negative for this film is that while the overall narrative worked for me, I liked watching the chaos behind the scenes. I liked watching Saturday Night Live go live for the very first time. There were way too many subplots throughout this film to really fully enjoy it to its full potential. And what I mean by that is that, yes, I liked the overall narrative, but the subplots, there were so many of them. There were so many characters in this film that the director was pushing into this hour and 40-minute runtime movie that you're just kind of like, all right, there's too much going on. And that's one thing that I can't say about Uncut Gems. Uncut Gems had one main storyline, maybe a subplot or two, but it all connected perfectly towards the end of that film. So the chaos felt like you had a payoff at the end of that movie. But because this movie is just the 90 minutes leading up to that first episode, and then the rest is history, I feel like so many of the subplots in this film just sort of fall by the wayside when you get to the end. You get to the end, you're just like, okay, well, I'm glad I watched Garrett Morris bitch about being on a show for an entire movie that he was cast on. Like, he was upset that he was cast but didn't know his place. And then you had other people trying to get on the show the entire movie, and some of them got cut, some of them didn't. And I was like, you could have cut some of that out, and I think you still could have had this perfect puzzle piece at the end. Yeah, it's cool to see Garrett Morris sing with a band at the end of the film. It's cool to see some of the people go on with 2-3 minutes of time for their sketches. Some people get cut, but there's just so much of that as the viewer, I don't think you can fully enjoy the entire experience because you're watching so many different subplots happen, and while the overall narrative is why you're there in the first place. But maybe all of those subplots lead to the chaos, and I liked the chaos, so maybe this isn't a negative after all. I'm somewhere in the middle. Overall, I will say that I had an enjoyable time with this film. It's not one I would say rush out to the theater and see unless you absolutely love that original Saturday Night Live crew. I think you might enjoy this one in the theater. Otherwise, I'd say you could wait for this one on streaming and you'd have an enjoyable time. But guys, those are just my opinions because that's my review for Saturday Night. Have you had a chance to see this film yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know where we agree or disagree. I'm curious if you've seen it. Maybe you're a little older than me and you remember all of those actors from Saturday Night Live. I'd love to know your thoughts on the portrayal of those characters especially. And with that said, if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of the review. Thanks for watching this far. I got to go see this movie with my older brother Aaron, and anytime I get to see a movie with him, it's special to me because I don't get to spend a ton of time with him. We're both very busy, so I'm glad I went and saw this one with him. With that said, if you like this video and you want to check out other content on my channel, well, I've got all of my best and worst of 2024 right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.